Hello and welcome to the first edition of Madison Science Living Environment. Hopefully everybody's doing well, staying home during this tough time. Today we're going to talk about body systems, but we're not going to cover all of them because honestly it would take us a long time. So we're going to go through part of them today and then possibly do more next time. So as a general overview, what you need to understand before you begin this is that cells overall, they're the basic building block of life. Everything is made up of cells, all living things. The cell is the basic unit of structure and function of all living things. And as we went through the cell theory earlier in the year to kind of spiral back to that, all cells come from pre-existing cells. So those are your three pieces of the cell theory. All tissues are made up of cells. Technically, there's only 4 kinds of tissue in our bodies. Organs themselves, they're made up of different tissues. So we have a whole bunch of different organs in our bodies. An organ would be something like a heart, which is made up of multiple tissues, which includes connective, nervous, epithelial, and muscle tissue. That's all 4 of the different kinds. Also, we have organ systems, which are groups of organs working together to accommodate a larger range of functions. They all work together to help our cells receive the nutrients they need, the oxygen, which technically is a nutrient, and to remove wastes and other metabolic products that need to be dealt with in the body, as well as making sure everything that's being produced in a cell is getting to where it's supposed to go. So each system is a combination of organs and tissues. Each one of those tissues, organs, has a specific function, but working together in the whole system, they can accomplish a wider range of things. Without these systems intact and working well, you have a failure of homeostasis, and then you have a sickness, which can lead to ultimately death, depending on the severity of the failure. So if you look at the bottom down here, right here, you can see the kind of organizational flow chart for the human body systems, the levels of organization that we use to discuss them. So you start with cells. Obviously, you can go smaller than this if you want to, look at things like organelles and molecules, even all the way down to atoms and individual pieces that make up atoms if you really wanted to. Starting with cells, we then go slightly larger to tissues, which are groups of cells that work together to accomplish a function. Then you move up to organs, which are groups of tissues that accomplish a larger function, a more important function, you might argue, but ultimately everything happens at the cellular level. And then you take it up another level to organ systems, which can accomplish a wider range of functions, which are obviously important for our survival. The first system we're going to talk about today is the digestive system. I'm going to move this up out of the way so you can see everything. The digestive system is the set of organs that are responsible for mechanical and chemical breakdown of food. So in other words, there are 2 ways that all the food we take in get processed. Mechanical would be things like chewing and mashing, smashing up the food as it's moving down through our body to get from our mouth down through our esophagus to our stomach. There's a little bit of mechanical breakdown happening all the way down through there. The majority of the mechanical breakdown obviously is happening in our mouth where our teeth are. We're chewing, and that process of chewing breaks the food down into smaller pieces, which increases the surface area. We have a little bit of chemical breakdown starting in our mouth because of enzymes like amylase, which start to break down starches. And then after that, the food gets swallowed. The esophagus is smashing up the food as it's moving down because it works somewhat like a toothpaste tube in that it's a rhythmic squeezing of food down through the tube until it reaches the stomach. In the stomach, you have acids and you have enzymes like pepsin, which is a protease that breaks down proteins, begins the breakdown of proteins. But you also have some more mechanical churning in the stomach. And so everything gets mashed up there and it turns into this kind of gross mixture called chyme. From there, It's going to pass into the small intestine, where more enzymes are added and more digestion of food nutrients is being done. As the food passes through the small intestine, eventually it enters the large intestine. There's a lot less absorption of nutrient in the large intestine than in the small intestine. The small intestine itself is very much twisted on itself. There's a lot of length to the small intestine because of how much it's twisted up. It's not as big around as the large intestine in diameter, but it's got a whole lot more surface area. And in that small intestine, you also have a whole bunch of infoldings in the sides of the intestines that increase the surface area a great amount, and that helps to increase the absorption of nutrients into our bloodstream in the small intestine. So the majority of the nutrient absorption is happening in this area. That energy, or that food nutrient, is then transported from the small intestine by the blood system, our circulatory system, to all the cells of our body to do with what they need. The large intestine, lots of water absorption happens here, so that's the main function in there. There's still some nutrient absorption, but mostly it's large intestine is preparing the food for excretion. The next system we talk about is the circulatory system. And the circulatory system's job is pretty obvious. It includes the heart, the veins, the arteries, arterioles, the capillaries, all these small blood vessels that are really important in moving nutrients around our body through diffusion into our blood. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are moved by these cells, and there are also immune system cells that are in the blood that help us to fight off infection. So the circulatory system is really important because when a cell uses all of the materials that are delivered to it for cellular respiration, there are some waste products that are produced. And those waste products, if they build up over time, can be really bad for a cell. So what happens is the cell diffuses them out into the blood. The blood picks them up, takes them to where they can be excreted, either through the lungs, sometimes in our breath. You're breathing out water all the time, you're breathing out carbon dioxide. You sweat out waste products through your skin. A lot of it ends up in our urinary bladder through filtering out by our kidneys. There's a lot of different ways that waste is dealt with by our bodies. But the fact is we need to get rid of it before it builds up to toxic levels, because if that happens, then that's a problem. So the circulatory system has two major functions. Number one, helps protect the body from disease, but it also delivers nutrients and takes away waste products, and that's probably the most important part of what the circulatory system does. Next is the respiratory system. Again, we think of the respiratory system, we think of respiration. In science, that's not really an accurate way to depict it. I don't love when it's said respiration. It's more breathing. Respiration is actually done in the cells themselves. It's cellular respiration. Oxygen is used to break down energy stored in food, specifically glucose, in most of the time. So the respiratory system plays a major role in gathering oxygen from the environment, bringing it in through our mouth and our nose, down our trachea, into our lungs, where it can then diffuse out into the bloodstream, where the circulatory system can then deliver it to the cells. So there's a lot of gas exchange that happens in our lungs, and it happens constantly. There are enzymes that assist it to speed it up, and it's a very, very important process overall. You can see kind of the main organs of the respiratory system over here, the throat, the larynx, the trachea, the bronchial tubes, which go into each lung, left and right. And then you have bronchioles, which are slightly smaller tubes that branch off from the bronchial tubes themselves. And if you go in even further, you'll see that there are little sacs called alveoli that wrap around the bronchioles and help to increase the surface area for exchange of gases back and forth. The reproductive system has an obvious important function in humans. obviously, this is what we use to create more of our own species. Without the reproductive system functioning the way it is, we would have been one and done as a species on the planet. It would have been over. There are a lot of major pieces to this system. We'll get into this in more depth when we do the individual systems themselves. But you can see some of the major organs of the reproductive system here, and they're slightly different in males and females, obviously. You've got various different important organs from males to females that are similar but not exactly the same in terms of their function. It depends on what genes are expressed, how they develop. We'll get into that in some depth in a later slideshow. The nervous system starts in our brain and connects to our spinal cord, and then from the spinal cord to the different nerves of the body. You have the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord running down the middle of your back, which goes to the peripheral nervous system that branches out from the spinal cord out to all of our limbs, all the way to our fingertips down to our toes. It works together with all of the other systems to help regulate them. It's a major component in maintaining homeostasis, and it's very, very important that we protect our nervous system, which is why if you're a coach like me, you're really concerned about things like concussions in your athletes, because you've only got one brain. You got to be real careful with it. Next, we talk about the endocrine system. The endocrine system is a gland system that provides hormones to the body, which help to regulate other cells. They're all targeted very specifically. As we talked about before, every single hormone has a target cell that it can affect. Most hormones can't affect more than one cell type. So in order to produce and regulate these homeostatic functions, the hormones need to be produced by specific glands and targeted to specific receptor cells, or not target cells, with the proper receptors on them. And this works in a slightly more slow fashion than the nervous system, but they do work together with the nervous system. If you need a really rapid response, the nervous system will do the things you need. If you need a slower response that has a longer lasting effect, typically the endocrine system is what we use to regulate that. Some of the major hormones that we talk about are insulin, human growth hormone, adrenaline. Those are big. We will also talk about testosterone. We'll talk about estrogen and progesterone. All major hormones in development, reproduction, growth, metabolism in our bodies. The fact is, the endocrine system produces hormones that are released into our blood internally, which is why it's endocrine instead of exocrine, because the endo means internal or inside, exo means outside. And it's a very important system, which we will spend some time on again at a later date. Then we have the excretory system. The excretory system itself, move this down out of your way. The excretory system itself is responsible for removal of waste products from our body. There's a lot of different kinds. It can be excess water. So, our urinary bladder, major function there is to remove excess water from our bodies. It works in conjunction with the kidneys to remove water that isn't necessary in the blood and get it out of us. You can have too much water. It's possible. Excess heat. Our skin is a major organ of the excretory system because our temperature control is largely managed by our skin. Evaporation of heat from our skin is a major way that we get rid of excess heat energy. Solid wastes, so our colon, our rectum, and our anus, they're major parts of that to remove the solid waste, the food particles that we don't break down or use in our bodies. Gaseous waste from our lungs, our trachea, our nose, and our mouth. Musculoskeletal system. This is obvious too. It's kind of combining two organ systems together here, which is really, you don't need to do it, but for the sake of what we're doing now, I'm going to. The musculoskeletal systems, they work together. It's the bones, obviously, and the skeletal muscles, because you have different types of muscle in your body. You've got 3 different kinds of muscle. You've got smooth, striated, and you also have cardiac. And there are 3 different muscle types. They all work a little bit differently. We'll get into that later. It is majorly coordinated, controlled by our nervous system. Some types of skeletal muscle are more necessary for, escaping danger and that kind of thing than others. So they are more tightly controlled by our nervous system. They're connected in what's called a reflex arc to our spinal cord. They can react without us even thinking about them. If you put your hand on a hot stove, you don't necessarily register the fact that the stove is hot before you're pulling your hand back, which helps to prevent damage to the tissues of your hand. Your bones provide support and structure. They also serve a major role in a couple of other things, calcium regulation and things like production of red blood cells, very important for us. Also, these things do help us, to reproduce, because the act of reproduction, you need certain muscles working in order for this to happen. The immune system, very, very important for all of us, obviously, especially in times like this. This is the system that finds, recognizes, and attacks foreign objects such as bacteria, virus, or fungus that get into our blood or underneath the layers of our skin. This system is really incredibly, it's really complicated how it works. And one of the things that I think that people don't realize is just how much goes on with your immune system on a daily basis. It's a fact that from the day you're born, the world is trying to find a way to kill you. And your immune system is the only reason that you're still here, because you are fighting off pathogens daily. And your body is just doing this on its own. You don't even recognize it. It's happening. You're not having to think about it, but it's happening. So it's a major, major, major part of the reason we're all still alive. Major aspects of this would be obviously the white blood cells. There are a bunch of different types, which we'll talk about later. Also, there are lymph glands. So you've got a bunch of different lymph nodes in your body. Up under your chin, you've got them in your armpits, you've got them underneath your tongue. They're all over the place. You'd be surprised just how many of these there are. The thymus gland, which is sitting back behind your heart. Bone marrow is a part of this. A lot of your white blood cells are being produced by the bone marrow. And then you have the spleen, which helps to kind of filter out old white blood cells that are not doing their job anymore. And that's it for today.